It was the mid-19th century, and Japan was a nation sealed away from the outside world, steadfastly preserving a way of life that had changed little in over 200 years. Under the rule of the Tokugawa shogunate, Japan was governed by a strict social hierarchy, a delicate structure that maintained the balance of power, peace, and order throughout the archipelago. At the very top was the shogun, the supreme military ruler, wielding authority over all lords and samurai, while the emperor, a divine figure in Japanese culture, remained secluded in Kyoto, respected but largely powerless. The shogunate's system was one of discipline and conformity. Society was divided into a rigid caste system, each role defined by honor and duty. The samurai, warriors bound by a code of loyalty and self-sacrifice, upheld the authority of the shogun. Beneath them were the peasants, who cultivated rice, the lifeblood of Japan's economy. Below them, the artisans and merchants formed the lowest ranks, contributing goods and trade but often looked down upon by the noble warrior class. Samurai roamed the countryside, enforcing the rules and ensuring that the balance remained unchallenged. For centuries, Japan had practiced the policy of sakoku, or closed country. Foreigners were barred from entering, and Japanese people were forbidden from leaving, effectively isolating the nation from the outside world. Only a small Dutch trading post in Nagasaki allowed for limited contact, providing a glimpse into the innovations of the West. However, this isolation, while safeguarding Japanese culture and tradition, came at a cost. Across the seas, Western powers were advancing rapidly, industries grew, militaries modernized, and nations expanded their empires. But to the shogunate, these changes seemed distant and unthreatening, as if Japan could remain untouched forever. Yet, in truth, this isolation was unsustainable, and soon, forces beyond Japan's control would change the course of its history. In 1853, a storm of change arrived on Japan's shores in the form of Commodore Matthew Perry and his squadron of black ships. These massive, steam-powered vessels appeared like phantoms in Edo Bay, spewing smoke and dwarfing the modest Japanese fishing boats that dotted the waters. The sight was unlike anything the Japanese had ever witnessed, a testament to Western technological power and an implicit threat. Perry's mission was clear. He had come to force Japan to open its ports to American trade, ending over 2 centuries of isolation. Perry carried a letter from U.S. President Millard Fillmore, politely yet firmly demanding that Japan abandon its isolationist policies. But behind the formality was an ultimatum. Perry's fleet was fully armed, and he was prepared to use force if necessary. He made it clear that he would return within a year for Japan's response, and he expected compliance. The shockwaves of Perry's arrival reached every corner of Japan. To the Japanese leaders, this intrusion was nothing short of an existential threat. They knew that their military technology was outdated. Their wooden ships and traditional weapons would be no match against Perry's firepower if he chose to invade. For the first time, Japan's isolation had been pierced, and with it came the realization of their vulnerability. Perry's ships were a warning of the West's technological might, a demonstration of power that left Japan with little choice. When Perry returned in 1854, Japan capitulated. The Treaty of Kanagawa was signed, opening 2 ports to American trade and marking the end of Japan's isolation. It was a concession made under pressure, and it exposed the weaknesses of the Tokugawa shogunate. Over the next few years, additional treaties with Britain, France, and Russia further eroded Japan's sovereignty, granting foreign powers privileges that undermined the shogunate's authority. The Japanese people watched as their country's self-imposed isolation crumbled, and with it, their confidence in the shogunate's ability to defend the nation. The seeds of discontent had been planted. As more foreign powers arrived on Japan's shores, demanding their own trade concessions, frustration and anger simmered across the country. The shogunate's inability to protect Japan from foreign influence was seen as a humiliating failure. Samurai warriors, bound by a code of honor, were particularly incensed. They had sworn loyalty to the shogun, yet he had failed to safeguard Japan's dignity. For centuries, the samurai had been Japan's defenders, but now they felt powerless, reduced to spectators as foreign merchants and missionaries infiltrated their homeland. Anti-foreign sentiments intensified. The slogan Sano Joy, meaning revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, became a rallying cry among those who believed the emperor should be restored to true power. To them, the shogunate had betrayed Japan's sovereignty by allowing foreign influence, and only the emperor, the sacred symbol of the Japanese spirit, could restore the nation's honor. This movement grew in strength, drawing support from powerful clans like Satsuma and Choshu. These domains, influential and independent, harbored their own grievances against the shogunate and saw an opportunity to restore the emperor to his rightful place. Secretly, they began to gather weapons and recruit soldiers, preparing for a confrontation that would pit them against the shogunate in a struggle to reclaim Japan's future. Discontent had evolved into determination, and it was only a matter of time before it erupted into conflict. The mounting tensions reached a boiling point in 1868 with the outbreak of the Boshin War, a civil war that would decide who would rule Japan and what kind of nation it would become. On one side were the forces of the Tokugawa shogunate, representing the old guard and a fading era. On the other were the forces of the Satsuma, Choshu, and Tosa clans, who fought under the banner of imperial restoration, rallying around the young Emperor Meiji. The battles were fierce and transformative, marked by a clash of ancient and modern tactics. In the pivotal Battle of Toba-Fushimi, the shogunate's forces suffered a major defeat. The imperial army, though smaller, had been equipped with modern firearms and cannons acquired from Western nations. The samurai of the pro-imperial factions fought with fervor, driven by a sense of honor and the belief that they were fighting to restore Japan's soul. The shogunate's forces, though disciplined and experienced, found themselves overpowered by both the superior firepower and the ideological fervor of the imperial army. As the war continued, the tide turned decisively in favor of the imperial forces. The shogunate's grip on power weakened with each defeat, and support for the emperor swelled across the nation. By the war's end in 1869, the Tokugawa shogunate had fallen, and with it, centuries of feudal rule. Emperor Meiji, only 15 years old, was declared the legitimate ruler of Japan, marking a new chapter in Japanese history. The Boshin War had cleared the path for transformation, setting the stage for Japan's rapid modernization. With the emperor restored, Japan set out on a path of sweeping reform. Known as the Meiji Restoration, this era was a relentless drive to modernize Japan's institutions, economy, and society to prevent further foreign dominance and ensure Japan's independence. Emperor Meiji and his advisors, eager to transform Japan, looked to the West for inspiration, inviting experts from Europe and America to teach them the latest advancements in technology, law, military science, and industry. The feudal system was abolished, and with it, the samurai class that had defined Japanese society for centuries. In its place rose a conscripted army, trained in Western tactics. Education was reformed, blending Japanese values with Western science and philosophy. Infrastructure projects transformed the landscape, as railways and telegraph lines connected distant regions. Cities rapidly industrialized, with factories producing textiles, steel, and machinery. Japan's modernization was rapid and intense. In just a few decades, it had transformed from a feudal society into a global power. By the early 20th century, Japan's military and industrial might were strong enough to rival those of Western nations. The Meiji Restoration had turned Japan into an empire in its own right, a testament to the nation's resilience and adaptability. Japan had not only preserved its sovereignty but had emerged as a modern power, ready to shape its destiny on the global stage. As Japan embarked on its journey of modernization, the military was one of the first institutions to undergo radical transformation. The once celebrated warrior class, the samurai, who had embodied Japanese martial prowess and upheld the strict code of honor known as Bushido, faced an existential crisis. The new Meiji government sought to establish a modern military, influenced heavily by Western models, prioritizing efficiency, discipline, and centralized command over the individualistic valor that defined the samurai ethos. In 1869, the government instituted conscription, compelling all able-bodied men to serve in the newly formed imperial army. Traditional samurai roles were increasingly diminished as the government recruited a diverse array of men, irrespective of social class. The samurai, once the elite defenders of the realm, were now compelled to adapt to this new order, leading to a deep sense of loss among many. By 1876, the Sword Abolishment Edict was issued, prohibiting the carrying of swords in public, a drastic measure that symbolized the diminishing power of the samurai. For them, the sword was not just a weapon but a profound symbol of their identity and societal role. With this edict, many samurai found themselves stripped of their status and honor, confronting the harsh reality of their new existence in a rapidly changing society. Some accepted the government's authority, transitioning into roles within the new military framework, while others clung to their past, resorting to uprisings such as the Satsuma Rebellion in 1877, where disillusioned samurai fought against the central government in a last-ditch effort to preserve their way of life. However, the rebellion was quashed by the modern imperial army, demonstrating the effectiveness of Japan's military reforms and solidifying the new order. With the end of the samurai era, Japan fully transitioned from its feudal past, embracing a centralized military power that would soon play a pivotal role in the nation's international ambitions. The Industrial Revolution in Japan was characterized by a pace and scale that transformed the nation within a few short decades. After centuries of isolation, the Meiji leaders recognized that a strong industrial base was essential to compete with Western powers. They embarked on an ambitious program to build a modern economy, investing heavily in infrastructure and technology. Starting in the 1870s, the government facilitated the establishment of model factories, introducing Western machinery and production techniques. The textile industry emerged as a cornerstone of Japan's industrial sector, driven by a combination of local craftsmanship and imported technology. Japanese silk, in particular, gained immense popularity in Western markets, establishing Japan as a significant player in global trade. Railroads sprang up across the archipelago, transforming transportation and communication. By 1900, Japan boasted a railway network that spanned over 6,000 kilometers, linking urban centers and rural areas. This network was vital in transporting goods and resources, fueling industrial growth, and enabling the swift movement of troops during conflicts. Telegraph lines crisscrossed the country, facilitating instantaneous communication, which was crucial for governance and economic coordination. With the industrial boom, urban centers swelled with migrants seeking work in factories. The cities became hubs of activity, but they were also plagued by social issues such as overcrowding, pollution, and labor unrest, as workers fought for better conditions and wages. Nevertheless, the Industrial Revolution laid the foundation for Japan's emergence as a global economic power, showcasing its ability to modernize rapidly and effectively adapt to the changing dynamics of the world economy. Central to the Meiji Restoration was a profound commitment to education reform. Recognizing that knowledge would be the cornerstone of Japan's modernization, leaders implemented a national education system aimed at fostering a literate and capable populace. In 1872, the government introduced compulsory education, mandating that all children, regardless of gender or class, attend school. This was a revolutionary step toward building a new Japan, capable of navigating the complexities of a modern world. Schools emerged rapidly across the nation, and the curriculum was designed to blend traditional Japanese teachings with Western knowledge. Mathematics, science, and foreign languages were emphasized, preparing students to engage with global advancements. Educators from the West were invited to Japan, providing training for Japanese teachers and enriching the educational experience with new methodologies and ideas. The introduction of Western thought and philosophy into the classroom challenged traditional views and encouraged critical thinking, sparking intellectual curiosity among students. Higher education institutions also began to flourish, producing a new class of professionals, engineers, and thinkers who would lead Japan into the 20th century. Students who studied abroad returned with fresh perspectives, advocating for reforms and new ideas that would continue to shape Japan's cultural landscape. This educational awakening was not limited to men. Girls were increasingly included in the educational system, gaining access to learning that had previously been denied to them. The rise of educated women would play a critical role in shaping Japanese society, leading to future social reforms and greater gender equality. The transformation of Japan during the Meiji era created new opportunities and challenges for women, who had long been relegated to subordinate roles in a patriarchal society. As factories emerged and the demand for labor increased, women found themselves entering the workforce in unprecedented numbers. By the end of the 19th century, women made up a significant portion of the textile industry, providing much-needed labor while simultaneously challenging traditional gender roles. However, factory life was harsh. Long hours, low wages, and poor working conditions were the norm. Despite these challenges, working in factories allowed women to contribute to their families' incomes and gain a degree of economic independence. This shift marked the beginning of a new social dynamic, as women began to assert their presence beyond the confines of home. Alongside their growing participation in the workforce, women began to advocate for their rights, inspired by broader social movements around the world. Education reform played a crucial role in this awakening. As more girls attended school, they were exposed to new ideas about equality and personal agency. Women's rights organizations began to form, promoting education, labor rights, and social reforms. The first women's magazine, Sido, emerged in the 1910s, discussing issues of suffrage and gender equality, giving voice to a generation that demanded recognition and respect. The evolving role of women in Japanese society was a testament to the changing tides of the Meiji era. As they began to step into new roles, they not only shaped the workforce but also laid the groundwork for future generations to challenge societal norms and strive for greater equality. The Meiji Constitution, promulgated in 1889, was a landmark document that marked Japan's first steps towards a constitutional monarchy. This constitution was inspired by Western political systems, particularly the Prussian model, which allowed the Japanese government to maintain a semblance of traditional imperial authority while incorporating democratic principles. The constitution established the Imperial Diet, a bicameral legislature comprising the House of Peers and the House of Representatives. While the emperor retained ultimate authority, the Diet provided a platform for limited public participation in governance. The introduction of a parliamentary system was groundbreaking for Japan, as it marked a shift from autocratic rule to a system that recognized the need for public representation, even if it was restricted to a small percentage of the population. In the years that followed, elections were held, and political parties began to form, fueling a burgeoning political culture. Though the rights of citizens were still limited, the very existence of a parliamentary body was a significant advancement, indicating Japan's desire to modernize its governance and align itself with Western ideals. This shift would lay the groundwork for future political developments, ultimately leading to the expansion of democratic rights and civil liberties as the century progressed. As the nation began to grapple with the complexities of governance, the Meiji Constitution symbolized not only Japan's commitment to modernization but also its aspiration to engage in international diplomacy as an equal among world powers. With the success of the Meiji Restoration firmly established, Japan turned its gaze outward, seeking to assert its influence and power in East Asia. The Sino-Japanese War of 1894 to 1895 became a pivotal moment in Japan's emergence as a formidable imperial power. This conflict arose from Japan's desire to expand its territory and influence over Korea, which was viewed as a vital buffer state against Western encroachment and a gateway to further expansion. The war was fought against China, a declining Qing dynasty struggling to maintain its authority amid internal strife and external pressures. Japan's military modernization, initiated during the Meiji era, proved decisive. The Imperial Japanese Navy swiftly dominated the seas, and the army showcased its newfound capabilities in land battles. The quick and resounding victory over China shocked the world and marked a significant shift in regional power dynamics. The Treaty of Shimonoseki, which concluded the war, ceded Taiwan and the Pescadores Islands to Japan and recognized Korea's independence, a significant step in Japan's quest for hegemony in East Asia. This victory was celebrated across the nation, fostering a sense of national pride and unity. However, it also set the stage for future conflicts as Japan's aggressive expansionism drew the ire of Western powers and regional neighbors, foreshadowing the turbulent decades that lay ahead. The Russo-Japanese War, fought from 1904 to 1905, further solidified Japan's status as a rising global power and marked a significant turning point in the history of imperialism. As Japan sought to expand its influence over Korea and Manchuria, it found itself in direct conflict with Russia, which had ambitions of its own in the region. Japan's military success was not merely a testament to its modernization efforts but also a strategic response to the changing dynamics of international relations. The war saw Japan utilize its navy effectively, defeating the Russian fleet at Port Arthur and later in the Tsushima Strait, which was a remarkable achievement for an Asian nation against a European power. The victory was celebrated as a historic triumph, earning Japan respect and recognition on the world stage. It became the first Asian nation to defeat a European power in modern history, challenging long-held perceptions of racial superiority and colonial dominance. The Treaty of Portsmouth, mediated by U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt, formalized the end of hostilities and granted Japan significant territorial gains, including Port Arthur and control over Korea. The repercussions of the war were profound, both domestically and internationally. Japan emerged with newfound confidence, asserting its interests in East Asia, while simultaneously confronting the complex realities of imperialism and the responsibilities that accompanied its status as a global power. The Russo-Japanese War was a critical chapter in the narrative of Japan's rise, serving as both a culmination of its modernization efforts and a precursor to the challenges it would face in the 20th century. As the early 20th century progressed, Japan grappled with the implications of its rapid modernization and expansion. The victories in the Sino-Japanese and Russo-Japanese Wars instilled a sense of nationalism and pride, but they also intensified militaristic and imperialistic ambitions. The economy began to pivot towards militarization, fueled by a belief that Japan had to secure its position as a dominant power in Asia and, indeed, the world. The global landscape was shifting, with tensions rising between major powers. As Western nations expanded their empires and exerted influence across Asia, Japan found itself increasingly isolated and vulnerable. The government, influenced by militaristic factions, began to adopt more aggressive foreign policies, aiming to expand its empire to secure resources and markets necessary for its burgeoning industrial economy. The Great Depression of the 1930s further exacerbated domestic challenges, leading to economic hardship and social unrest. In this environment, militaristic ideologies gained traction, with many advocating for expansion into China and beyond as a solution to Japan's problems. In 1937, the Second Sino-Japanese War erupted, a brutal conflict marked by atrocities and widespread devastation, further entrenching Japan's military and government affairs. This trajectory ultimately led Japan into the orbit of World War II, aligning with Axis powers and pursuing aggressive expansion in the Pacific. The complex legacy of the Meiji Restoration, its successes, challenges, and contradictions, set the stage for a tumultuous period in Japanese history, where the very forces that propelled Japan to greatness would also lead it toward a devastating conflict that would reshape the world.